This is not reality. Not reality. Not reality.
This is reality.
Camping in Washington. In September of 2011, I was camping up in the beautiful Cascade Mountains of Washington State with my friend Dave. My name is Dave as well. We got there early on Thursday to get to the spot we wanted to. It was, for us, the start of the Labor Day weekend, and we had set up camp and drove up an old logging road to get our firewood for the night. There's a bridge close to our campsite. We had supper and relaxed around the campfire, and at about 10:30 that night, I decided to grab a flashlight and go looking around the area across the bridge. I really had not planned on looking for Bigfoot, as I was busy with the logistics of putting this camping trip together. I will say, I am a true believer in Sasquatch and read Bigfoot stories all of the time. As I cleared the bridge, there is a dead-end road on the right that goes down for about a quarter of a mile or so. I know this because I've been down there. The road is gated at the top. In the middle of the gate is a red reflector, and I couldn't see the reflector because something was standing in front of it. I'd shined my regular flashlight with about 3/4 battery power down the road. What did I see? A big pair of yellow eyes looking back at me. I froze. I remember thinking, "Oh my God." I noticed that the right eye was much brighter than the left eye, and I thought that perhaps there was some hair hanging down over the inside of the left eye, or maybe it had an injury. I then noticed how far apart the eyes were, and how high up from the ground they were. Actually, they were roughly even with mine, but the road there sloped down a bit, about 4 feet or more. I'm 5'8", and this thing would have towered over me. The creature was either dark brown or black, and I couldn't make out any body or head features at all. Just those yellow eyes. There was no odor at all. The air was perfectly still, and this thing made no noise. I processed all of this very quickly. If it would have growled at me, it would have been laundry time. It seemed to kind of be going side to side a little without moving its feet. Then the eyes dropped down a little and made a big circle. Then another circle, same as the last, like an owl, only way bigger. I thought maybe he had put his hands on his knees, kind of like I've seen apes on TV do, and it looked at me for about 3 more seconds, and I lost it. Not knowing what this thing was going to do next, I took off running to the middle of the bridge and spun around. Every hair on my body was standing up. It didn't follow me. I wasn't surprised, but I was also very happy. I realized I was panting and sweating, mostly from adrenaline. I hustled back to camp and told Dave what had happened, and I said, "Let's go back over there. Grab your camera." He had a digital one with a strong flash and video and audio capabilities. I was really excited at this point. I knew that if this could be a chance of a lifetime to get this thing on film. You have to understand that in my mind, there was nothing else that this creature could be than a real Sasquatch. I mean, I completely believe that to this day. Anyway, Dave couldn't find his camera, and after he looked for a few minutes, I got pissed and just said, "Let's go while this thing is still in the same county." So we get to the bridge and walk very fast at first, and then slow down, trying to be as quiet as we could. I whispered to him, "You watch the left side. I'll watch this side. We'll try to get both the flashlights on it at the same time." Dave had a flashlight that was similar to mine. The thing wasn't in front of the gate anymore, and that really didn't surprise me. But what I did see was the red reflector. I didn't even know it was there the first time, but there it was. If something hadn't been standing there before, it would have stuck out like a sore thumb. It had been blocked by the Bigfoot. On Dave's side was a pullout. It was empty. I told Dave, "Hey, shine your light up the road." And there it was. On my side, walking slowly towards us. He had the exact same eyes. The left one messed up, just like the first time I saw him. Dave and I were about 10 or 12 feet apart, and I said, "Dave, there he is. Do you see it? Dave, he's coming. There he is." Both of our lights had shined on this thing's face at the same time, only for like 3 seconds or so, but it lit his head up. The head did not look pointed, like many people have reported, but it was big. I was slowly backing up as I watched it walking towards us. "Don't you see it?" I said. Dave said, "No." I had no idea how he couldn't have seen this thing. Again, I was backing up slowly out of fear, but I was watching those eyes move up and down rhythmically. Well, it turns out that Dave can't see much in bright sunlight, and at night he is basically following the sound of your voice. So he couldn't find his camera at the critical time, and I have no witnesses to this incident, even though he was right there with me. I mean, I love the guy, but fuck. So I get scared and take off running to the middle of the bridge again, with Dave right behind me. And the only reason he's running is because I was. You ever hear the joke about never going grizzly bear hunting with a friend who can outrun you? Well, I outweighed Dave, and he had trouble keeping up. Also, although the road was going uphill, it was very straight and flat. I was familiar with this stretch of road, having camped there many times. This gave me a great idea of how tall this thing actually was. When I say it was pushing 10 feet tall, I feel confident that this is an accurate judgment of its true height, and there were no tree branches there at all to justify an owl sitting on a limb. If it was an owl, it would have had to have been 10 feet tall. We quickly got back to camp, and Dave, of course, then finds his camera. It was under his sleeping bag. We jumped into our van and shot across the bridge. Of course, we couldn't find the thing, and it was gone. I knew that he was just inside the trees on one side or the other, but it was as dark as the inside of a buffalo on a moonless night. The next morning, I walked across the bridge to the top of the road on the right. I walked up to the gate and stood there, right exactly where he stood. I paced it off, and it was roughly 45 yards to where I stood when I first spotted him. I'll tell you this, I'm bringing a massive flashlight the next time I go out there, and have a camera ready as well. But, you get your chances when they happen, and I just was not prepared. One thing I haven't mentioned. At the time all this happened, I had totally forgotten that in my tent were my 2 guns. I had my 9mm pistol, plus a 12-gauge sawed-off double-barreled shotgun, side by side and barely legal. That thing was loaded with double-aught buckshot, but it had never occurred to me to shoot this guy. I had completely forgotten that I was heavily armed, and when he was walking down the road towards us, in retrospect, he was just kind of shooing us away, I think. I think of him as being a gentle giant, and he very easily could have run us down and killed us. I feel blessed that they are out there, and that this one did not harass or threaten us in any way, other than just leisurely walking towards us and scaring the crap out of me. I plan on going back out there, but more prepared this time. This encounter was truly terrifying, even though it doesn't sound like it was, and he didn't hurt us. But we were both scared. Even our big German shepherd knew something was wrong. Hopefully all 3 of us will go back and see him again. My Grandparents' Haunted House, submitted by Tom219. I'll start off with a little backstory. This takes place in a small town in Indiana. I've always thought my grandparents' house was haunted. It was a big old house with a small pond in the back. It wasn't in the middle of nowhere like a lot of haunted house stories you might hear, but it was the biggest house on the street. I'm not sure how often it is to move an entire house to a different plot of land, but originally my grandparents' house was located somewhere else in town. As little kids, my cousins and I would often tell ghost stories in the basement. A few times, we thought we saw and heard things, but it might have been our young imaginations. My grandma was very religious. She said the rosary every day, and her and my grandpa went to church every Sunday, and they had crosses and religious pictures all over the house. That's the main reason why I think the activity wasn't as active while they were still alive. After they passed away in 2010 and 2011, exactly 6 months to the day, my family and I started to clean out the house. The house was now in my mom's name, although nobody lived there. I would go there every few weeks to cut the grass, and with it being a good-sized yard, I would go inside and take a break halfway through. The only furniture left was a couch, a TV, and pictures on the wall. In one instance, I was sitting on the couch without the TV on, just texting someone, when all of a sudden a picture of Jesus hanging on the wall on the other side of the room just fell off the wall and shattered everywhere. It scared the shit out of me. The odd thing about it was that it fell straight down, but the nail was still sticking out of the wall. The next incident happened a month later when I was there taking a break again from cutting the grass. I was watching TV, but the volume was really low, and then I heard pounding coming from upstairs in the hallway. It was a very narrow hallway, and it sounded like somebody was walking down it very slowly, banging the walls really hard with their fists on both sides. At first, I didn't think anything paranormal. I thought somebody had broken in. After a minute of staring at the bottom of the staircase, I finally worked up enough courage to go up there and check it out. I grabbed my small pocket knife from my waist and walked up there slowly, and since it's an old house, almost every step creaked, making it even more scary and intense. For this being a big house, the upstairs is very small, although the upstairs has 5 rooms, but again, each of them is small. I checked room by room, including every closet, but nobody was there. The upstairs had already been completely cleared out, and there was no furniture or anything at all, so there would be absolutely no place to hide. The last memorable incident happened maybe a few months later when my Uncle James and I were cleaning out the last few things from the basement, a refrigerator and a deep freezer. After we got the refrigerator up the stairs and out, we came back in, locked the door, and went back into the basement. There's an old sink down there, and under it we found a box that belonged to one of my other uncles from years ago, so we started looking through it. It was filled with concert ticket stubs, old newspaper clippings, and things like that. Then my Uncle James put his finger up in front of his lips and said, "Shh," and he pointed upward. We both looked up and heard footsteps in the kitchen, like someone was trying to be quiet. You could tell exactly where they stepped because a little bit of dust would fall from the ceiling with each step. My uncle grabbed a weapon, I think it might have been a hammer, and I grabbed a sledgehammer, and we tiptoed to the bottom of the staircase. The way the house is set up is after you walk past the kitchen is the basement stairs. As we were looking up the staircase, we could still hear the light footsteps in the kitchen. My uncle looked at me and whispered, "On the count of 3, we run up there." I shook my head as he counted to 3 on his fingers. We ran up into the kitchen, and to our surprise, nobody was there. We checked the front and back doors, and they were both locked. We then searched the entire house and found nothing. I know for a fact that something or somebody was in the kitchen because it was so obvious with the footsteps and dust falling with each step.
Thing at Devil's Bridge, submitted by Lonnie. Okay, first off, this was a crazy night. It happened in a town called Kirby Lonsdale, which is in Cumbria, about 80 kilometers or so north of Manchester, England. I was living in a flat with my mate Aaron and working at a local pub, and that's where this whole thing started. There's a fairly famous spot right outside of town called the Devil's Bridge, and people from all over the place come to take pictures of it and all that rot. I grew up here, so it's never been a big thing, but it's a draw for a lot of other people. When I was a lad, we used to tombstone it into the river, which was frowned upon, and there are bylaws against it now. The police chased us once, but they don't really enforce it, and people stop when they come around anyway. So one night in the spring of 2000, I was having a pint and a bite with some friends at the place I was working at when I had a night off, which was rare. I worked almost 7 days a week back then and loved being in the place. It was getting late and almost time to close up, but there were some touristy people still nursing their drinks, and they were staying the night, so we didn't just want to give them the boot. They were Yanks, about my age. I was around 22 at the time, and one guy was totally arseholed and making a fuss of everything. They had gotten in late and were supposed to see the bridge in the daylight, but ended up checking in and staying in the tavern as it had started raining. He was moaning about not seeing the bridge, and they were moving on in the morning. I assured him it wasn't that big of a deal, and that they could check it out in the morn, and it would be just as spectacular as then as ever. Somehow we got to talking about how we used to jump off the bridge, we called it tombstoning, and we all had a laugh about being stupid kids. Drunk guy, I'll call him David to save him embarrassment, started saying he wanted to do that too, and I laughed and I told him it was against the law and kind of dangerous. But he kept on saying he wanted to do it, and then he started offering money if we went out there right then and there. His mates tried to calm him down as he got louder and louder and insisted on going to the bridge right then, even if he couldn't jump. He offered me a $5 to take them, and I said, no, just wait for the morn. But he kept offering more. Right, the guy is drunk, his friends aren't far behind him, and they get up to like 20 pounds or so I shake my head, and I tell my friend I'll call Patrick. I'll split it with him if we went out there together to take these guys. It wasn't a far walk, but it was dark and rainy, and while I knew I was taking advantage of these guys, I still did it. We got out there after our short trip, and I remember saying, here it is, it's just a bridge. David first looked over to the side and saw that it's about 13 or 15 meters down to the water, and his idea to jump ended right there. He did, however, insist on going down near the water to look back at the bridge, even though it was dark. So I told him to follow me, and I got them all down. We were down on a grassy side, and I'm thinking, ho-hum, but hey, I just made a tenner for doing nothing, and that's when one of the other guys, I'll call him John, says, "What is that?" He was pointing across the river at something on the rocks, and it took me a minute to see what it was. I can only describe it as this thing. For a second, I thought it was just someone pissing around, but the more we all looked at it, we realized it was real, and it was not a human. It was about my height, just under 2 meters, and it was covered in dark hair. Again, it was night, it was across the river, it was drizzling, but this thing was there, looking at something in the rocks. "What the hell is that?" whispered David, and I told him, "I don't really know." My mates looked at each other and were saying the same thing. What the hell was going on? The thing kept doddering about the rocks, and to this day we all think it was looking for something to eat, mice or what have you. One of the Yanks picked up a rock and threw it toward the thing before anyone could tell him to stop, and the splash got the thing's attention, and it looked around, and then it looked at our little group. I could see it sort of bend its head forward, like it was trying to get a better look at us, and that's when I realized we were in danger. Now, I'm not saying this was Bigfoot, and there's not a lot of stories about Bigfoot around here, and in all the stories and things I've looked at later after this happened, I've never heard of one being dangerous, or whatever, in like some of the movies I've seen. But this thing got mad. It let out this growl-like howl and kept staring at us. I said we should go, and the moment we turned, this thing jumped into the water at us, and before we even got all the way up the bank, it was already on our side and running up at us. We booked it across the bridge back towards town, and whatever this thing was right behind us. I was the last of the group. I'm not that fast, sorry. And I could hear it breathing and the slapping of its footsteps on the tarmac. I look back now and think that it didn't really want to catch up with us. It just wanted to chase us away for some reason. I can't really say. It let out another growl-like howl as we ran back to the main road and into town. As soon as we got to the streetlights of the roadway, I looked back and saw it standing a ways back, just staring at us. Everyone else had stopped too, and we all looked at it for at least a full minute before it howled again and then ran into the fields. We got back to the tavern, and I used my key to get into the back and got everyone a brandy at the bar. It's something my dad always told me to do to get people to calm down. No one spoke all the way back to the pub, but now everyone was bristling with chatter about what had just happened. I told the Yanks my mates had never heard or seen anything like that before, and we all talked about what the heck it could have been. David was sure it was a Bigfoot, but it just seemed impossible to me. Then the phone rang, and it was my boss wondering why the lights were on, and I told him the whole story. He just laughed, told us we were off our trolley, and said finish up quick and get the guests to where they needed to be, and that he thought we saw something that came out of a few too many pints. I did just that, and then got myself home to bed. I have to admit, on my solo walk back to my flat, I was more than nervous and scared, always looking over my shoulder. Maybe that thing had followed me into town. In the morning when I went back, the guys were gone, and I never saw or heard that thing again. Neither has anyone else I've asked or told the story to. David found me on MySpace years after this happened, and the last thing he said to me was, "What the hell was that thing?" That was a little more scary than jumping off a bridge. I have to agree with him. My Old House, submitted by Old Troll. One Saturday afternoon, my husband had taken my son swimming, and I took my daughter to the cinema. We all met up in town after and then ate out. That night, at about 11:30-ish, Gray and I were chilling, watching a really cheesy Horror the Cats, I think it was called. Anyway, halfway through, the phone rang. I answered to a man's voice, saying he was returning a phone call from our number. He said he was a gas plumber and apologized for calling late, but he had only just got in and thought it was best to call now as it might have been an urgent call. I told him that we had not called any plumber, and my husband could do any jobs like this as it was his trade. The caller apologized and said the call from our number was at 3:30 p.m. that day. No message, but caller ID showed our number. Now, odd as it might sound, I felt I knew his voice. His voice sounded like an old friend John from our teens. Then I recalled John was a plumber now, so I just asked, "Is this John so-and-so?" And he said yes. I said, "It's Babs." Don't laugh, that's my nickname. John went quiet and then said, "I've just moved house and saw you pass the other day. You were heading up the hill and went into the first house. Is that where you live now?" Turns out, John only lived a few doors down the road from me now. Though John was certain about the call from my number, I explained we were all out that afternoon, and we couldn't have called. But what a coincidence, and we agreed it was really odd to have that kind of thing happen. About 6 months on, we all came back from grocery shopping, and there was a missed call on our monitor. No message. So, as my husband was in the building trades, I thought best to call back in case it was a potential customer. What I got was a man's voice saying that he had been returning our call from around 1:30 p.m. I know this will sound unbelievable, but it's the truth. I have nothing to gain by lying, but I recognized the voice. Not John this time, but Benny, another old friend from my teens, also a plumber. I asked him if that was his name, and he said yes, and I told him we hadn't called, and told him what had happened with John. Benny knew John from back in the day, and I explained that there was no way we had either of their numbers, and told him I was pretty freaked out by all of this. The first time was really odd, but twice? We chatted a while and caught up, and then I put it down to just being weird. Another year on, and I had divorced and money was tight. Hands up to not paying the phone bill, so they put me on incoming calls only until I paid up. So for a while I couldn't make calls, but could receive them. About 4 p.m. one afternoon, my daughter and I were sitting watching TV when the phone rang. I answered to what sounded like a teenage boy, and he said he was returning a call from my number that had come about a half hour earlier. I told him that no one had used the phone, and the only people in all afternoon were sitting together in the same room as the phone. I didn't fancy having to tell a stranger that I hadn't paid my bill and was stuck on incoming calls only. The boy on the phone said he had been out, and when the phone rang, his older brother had answered, and a young teenage boy had told him to call back. The brother was confused, and the caller hung up, so the older lad told his brother when he got in that it must have been one of his mates. I shuddered. Not only had my phone called someone else again, but this time there was a voice involved. I really wanted to ask this lad more, but of course it wouldn't have been right. So I can already tell that he was unnerved as to what was going on, and I told him straight out that our phone was on incoming calls only, and so it was not possible to make a call from my number. I wondered after whether there was a connection with the last call to someone else I used to know, but I guess I'll never find out. Home Alone, submitted by Sweet One 453. Growing up in the country was a lot of fun on my family farm, but there was one time something terrified me that I'll never forget. My family's place was outside of La Crosse, Kansas, and if you don't know where that is, I don't blame you. It's right in the middle of the state and really in the middle of nowhere. My father and grandfather ran a wheat and corn farm, but we also had some animals that we usually grew for extra food, to butcher ourselves too. Chickens, some cows, and pigs. When I was 16 and my sister was 12, my grandpa died unexpectedly, and it was a very tough time in our family. We had to hire some new hands, which worked out well, but it kind of opened my father's eyes to how he was living his life and never taking time out to actually live. If you don't know, farming is not an easy life. It's a lot of time, and it's a lot of hard work. My mother finally convinced him to take some time off. It was winter, and she told him to go visit my uncle in California and just relax. She would stay home with us and give him some time to just be by himself and figure things out. He did, and that first Saturday night while he was gone, my mom was asked by a friend to go to the movies in Great Bend, which was like 45 minutes away. She then asked me to watch my sister, and I said okay. And for two teenage girls, we got along pretty well, and I promised her movie night at home with popcorn and everything. My mom was planning on eating at a restaurant after the movie, so I put my cooking skills to work and made TV dinners when she left. Yeah, I was a heck of a chef. Everything was going great, but at about 8 p.m., I went to get refills on our Cokes and happened to look out of our kitchen window into the backyard. We had a large barn out there with a floodlight that automatically came on with any movement in the yard, and I was standing there, and it did just that. Standing next to the barn was a shape of a man, a big man. He didn't do anything. He was just standing there, but he must have moved a little to get the light to go on above him. I was in the dark of the house, so I'm positive he couldn't see me, but right away I knew something was wrong. I stood there waiting to see if he would move, thinking maybe it was one of my dad's friends over to borrow something, but that couldn't be. My mother would have told me if that was going to happen. After about 5 minutes, the light turned off and I could still sort of see the man, but after another minute or so, he just kind of walked backwards into the dark and was gone. I'll admit, I was a little spooked, but figured maybe it was someone who was lost. I mean, why they were way out here, I didn't even think about that. Which should have tipped me off that something was very wrong, as our closest neighbor is about 2 miles away, and there was nothing behind our house except the fields for our crops. Being a naive kid, I got 2 more Cokes and just went back to the living room. My sister and I finished one of our movies, and while I was rewinding the tape, my sister went to use the bathroom. A couple of minutes later, I heard her yell down to me that there was a man outside, and I ran back to the kitchen. Sure enough, the same figure was standing in the light of the barn. This time he was a little closer, and I could see he was wearing a heavy coat and hat. I stayed low in the window watching him, but again the light went out and he went back to the dark behind the barn. Just then my sister came up behind me and I gave out a shriek and then punched her, telling her to never sneak up on me again like that, little brat. She was worried, and I told her that it was strange, but maybe it was just someone lost, and if he came back, I'd yell out to him to see what he wanted. My sister wanted me to get the gun. I'd been shooting since I was 9, and I told her to settle down. We stood there in the dark, and just a bit later the light came on from outside again, and there was the man, now walking towards the house. He stopped about halfway between the house and the barn this time, and now the light was behind him, so I couldn't make out who it was. I told my sister to run and get one of the shotguns with some shells, and she was back in record time. I opened the back door slowly. "Who are you, and what are you doing out there?" I called, feeling brave with my shotgun in my arms. The man said nothing. He just stood there. I asked again what he was doing, but it was the same. "You'd better get going on before I wake up my dad," I said, lying, but not wanting him to know it was just us two home alone. The light went out, and I saw him walking back to the barn in the dark again before the light clicked back on. I went back inside, told my sister to call the police, and then made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I took the phone from her and told the police what was going on, and that we were sure it wasn't a friend of the family. They said they'd be out as soon as they could, and to just stay put until then. I hung up, and then we waited to see what was going to happen. And again, sure enough, the light came on, and there he was, walking even closer to the house, but this time he kept on going around to the side of the house and out of our view of the back window. We ran back into the living room and saw lights coming up the drive, and it was the police. An officer got out of his truck and came up to the porch, and I opened the door as we talked over one another, trying to tell him what happened. He calmed us down a bit and then said he was going to look around and for us to just stay inside. About 10 minutes later, he knocked on the door again and we let him in. He hadn't found anything, and he thought we probably scared him off for good when he pulled up into the driveway. We thanked him, and he said to call again if something else happened, and that he'd drive by again later on just to make sure that we were safe. Nothing else happened, but we were still pretty scared. It was about 11:30 when my mom should have been getting home when we heard glass break on the side door, and I looked into a mirror that was propped so I could see the side door without leaving the living room. A hand was reaching in for the locks, and I screamed for my sister to call the police again, and I yelled out that I had a gun. My sister was screaming into the phone, and the door opened, and in stepped this man I'd never seen before. I pointed the gun at him, and he stopped and stared at me and just looked at the gun. I screamed at him to leave, and the police were coming, and he turned and walked out, and then started running out to the back of our property. The police weren't that far away, and they came flying up our driveway, and the policeman got out of his truck and started yelling at the man who was still creeping around our barn. 2 other sheriff cars also pulled up, and they surrounded the guy, caught him, and arrested him. Not long after, my mom pulled up, saw the police cars, and was hysterical that something happened to us, and between all of us, we told her what had happened. The guy was some drifter who had overheard my dad talking to someone in town that he was going out of town, and that it would just be us ladies at home. When they caught him behind the barn, he was trying to hide a pistol, and he had ropes and tape in a plastic bag that he had left outside of the house. They took him away, and my parents did a bunch of legal things to make sure he would never come back, but that was a scary night. My mom beat herself up for years for not being home with us, but my dad said I did the right thing by getting the shotgun out and letting the guy know I had it. I've got kids of my own now, and every time I leave them alone, I think of that night. I know I can't live my life in fear, and I don't, and my kids are great on their own, but I still think about it. Hey gang, hope you enjoyed this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I'm working on Volume 45 and a little bit longer format, but right now, as you all know, this is the best I can do in between the crying and the feedings and the working and taking care of all the other things that I have to take care of. If you like this, please subscribe. Like, share a comment, share this with your friends, and make sure that you hit the notification tab so that you know when I am uploading all my new content. Thanks to all my patrons, and if you are interested in supporting this page, you can find a link to my Patreon page in the description below, as well as links to all of my social media. I hope to see you there. Everybody, take care, be excellent to each other, and I'll see you in the next episode. And until then, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.